Are black poverty and unemployment rates so high? Part 2. And our host is Connell Friel.
At a recent congressional hearing with Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, Congressman Green of Texas asked Bernanke, "Can you tell me why black unemployment rates and poverty rates are more than twice those of white Americans?" Bernanke indicated this was not his area of expertise, but the question is a good one. The black poverty rate is 25% versus 10% for whites. Black unemployment is 8.5% versus 4% for whites. Tonight's program asked the same question, why? And also, we'd like to know what can be done to address this problem. Our guests are Alvin Bessent and Bill Andrews. Alvin Bessent is a member of Newsday's editorial board. He covers national domestic issues such as taxes, homeland security, education, campaign finance, and Medicare. Since 9/11, he's written extensively on civil liberties and the proper limits of presidential power in wartime. Bessent joined the editorial board 13 years ago after 7 years as a reporter. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Michigan State University, a master's in journalism from Columbia University, and completed a fellow at Stanford University in international relations. He worked as a college advisor and legislative aide to Michigan Governor Milkinson before embarking on a journalism career. Bill Andrews is the chairman of the board of Consumer Action Program of Bedford-Stuyvesant, an economic development corp, which is the second largest employer in Brooklyn. By profession, Bill is a financial advisor who lives and works in Bedford-Stuyvesant and is the father of 4 children, all of whom graduated from New York City public schools. 2 of his children have college degrees, and 2 are now in college. Bill has been a strong parent advocate for more than 20 years and has advised the New York City Chancellor and the Board of Education for over 10 years. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Frank Russo is my guest this evening, and Frank has my guest host this evening, and Frank has the first question.
Thank you, Connell. And thank you, gentlemen, again, for taking the time and the trouble to come on. We appreciate it on a very important subject, I think.
My pleasure.
In a prior program, we discussed the problem of the high poverty rate among blacks versus that of whites. Now we'd like to look at the problem of the high unemployment rate of 8.5% amongst blacks versus 4% among whites, and what you think might be the major contributing factor or factors to this. And I'll start with you, Bill.
Yeah, well, I think it's a lack of, and it's no simple answer here, but lack of skills in a general way, because our educational system has really failed, in my opinion, young black males and Hispanics. For several years at the Board of Education, I was on their advisory council dealing with employment issues for that next generation. And we were dealing with the large corporations, all in the banking industry, and IBM and so forth. They had all representatives there. And the overriding thing that was coming through was that our young males in particular that weren't on that academic track for a college were not getting properly educated for the other, let's say, blue-collar jobs. And the question was why? And somehow or another, the powers that be still haven't answered that question. And as a result, many males drop out of high school, and many Hispanics never got through the 8th grade. And you have this high unemployment rate in the inner city because lack of skills. School system is not training them for those jobs that they could get as a journeyman in the electricity, in the carpentry, and in the plumbing and so forth. Jobs that you pay a lot of money for if you're in the real estate industry, but no one is there for the inner city kids to get trained to get these jobs. And as a result, it's like a network, a clique, that if you're connected to it, you'll get those jobs and you'll get the training.
Okay, Alvin?
You know, Bill's right. Excuse me. Education is key. You've got to have a certain level of skills and abilities to get to prosper in the workforce in this country these days. It's getting much tougher to do it without or a certain level, a threshold level of skills and education. And all the things Bill talked about play into not a lot of black people not getting to that level. But once you get beyond that point, Once you get beyond that threshold where you do have the skills and the talents and the abilities that should get you into the workforce, then you've got a problem of connections. And yes, discrimination. In a soft way, I think, softer than in historically, where blacks were just absolutely barred, no blacks need apply. It's not that overt now. But I think it's human nature that when people in a position to hire look at a group of people who are potential employees and they see someone that they're comfortable with, they can talk with, they know people in common, they go to maybe the same clubs, there's a certain connection that's made that will elevate that person into that job. And oftentimes that person who's elevated because of those similarities with the person doing the hiring is not black, because they don't have that shared experience. They don't have those things in common. Years ago I was at a conference where the subject was, a national conference, the subject came up was affirmative action. And there was a young woman who was a white woman who was a college student. She wanted to be a lawyer. And she didn't quite understand the need for affirmative action. And so she was asked, well, how did you manage to get into law school and do all those things? And she said, well, you know, while I was a college student, I decided it would be a good thing if I could do a clerkship, an internship with a judge. So I talked to my dad. And my dad knew a neighbor who was a federal judge, and he didn't have any room. But he talked to a friend of his who brought me in for the summer. It wasn't paid. I spent the summer working with the judge. So when I went to apply for law school, I had a federal judge writing a recommendation saying he had worked with me. Now, two things. Not many black kids have those kind of connections to get that kind of internship. She gets a leg up. And the person who hires her will say, well, it's because she's more qualified, because she has that internship. But she had an advantage in getting it. And the other thing that's key there is she could spend the summer working, making no money. A lot of black students can't afford that. You've got to make money, so you take some blue-collar job, you take some physical labor job, because you've got to make money in order to go back to college. Two advantages built into her advancement. In her view, she was just simply more qualified.
Now let me ask you this, to look at the two things you both addressed, education and discrimination, and not having connections in a way is a form of discrimination. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, it's something that's not on a fairness basis in my judgment. Considering the two issues, discrimination and lack of proper education, we do know that black children are performing much more poorly than white children on the standard NAEP test results. And the schools are inferior, they're just not doing as well. What is the bigger factor of those two? Do you think it's more due to discrimination or more due to lack of proper education? Alvin, I'll start with you.
Well, it depends on who you are and where you are in that cycle I was
For for the largest number, for contributing to that 8.5% unemployment, what's the bigger factor contributing to that? Or do you think they're equal?
Impossible for me
You
to
have no
answer,
idea,
quite frankly, because I think both play into it.
Now, let me, just as a comment, I was a division manager at Verizon at 30 years, and in 1972, affirmative action programs were implemented. All of a sudden, everything changed. Not only were, did they have quotas, they set up literally quotas of how many blacks and women and so forth, but there were cases where preferential treatment was given to members of what they called underutilized groups. And in fact, AT&T adopted a policy, the Bell system did, called Affirmative Action Override. Affirmative Action program was wonderful. I don't know how anyone could object to it. It's to make extra efforts to seek out and recruit members of what they called underutilized groups in various jobs. It could even be a white male as an operator if they had all women. But then they instituted this Affirmative Action Override, which said you hire and promote basically qualified members of underutilized groups in preference to, it was in writing, I think I have a copy, in preference to members of overutilized groups, white males, who are better qualified. It was reverse racial discrimination. Affirmative action is widespread today, certainly in large companies. I mean, where I'm coming from, I don't see discrimination, and the lack of connections, I really see that in certain high-level jobs. But in ordinary jobs, I don't see discrimination as the big. I see it as the lack of the proper education. But I don't know that you don't see that, and I'm wondering where you are.
Okay, well, one of the things what I think is, and I was more in tune with what you were saying until I saw this video put out by David Barton and the Wall Builders, where it showed that many in our generation are not aware that our United States federal government had built into it a discrimination policy towards a particular group, which were blacks.
What was the name of that video do you remember the name?
American History in Black and White.
American History in Black and White.
And it traces discrimination by our government all the way back from slavery. It's just a fantastic video that shows that there's a reason why black males today in this country are the way they are as far as the economic cycle is concerned, and why, in many instances, they vote the way they do. I mean, for example, one of the points is many blacks today are not aware that the party that the majority of them belong to, the Democratic Party, was really the father party that kept the affirmative action that you're talking about that's needed from ever taking place. It never was going to happen if it never would have happened in this country if it wouldn't have been for Republicans, believe it or not, because there were so many.
Shocks a lot of people.
Yeah,
I know.
shocks so many people. There were so many people that were anti-Republicans after the Civil War to keep blacks down and really obtaining the necessary tools that you had alluded to in the other program, where you need that tradition of owning property, developing the property, having people working for you. And so you can develop the connections and you can dovetail with the education that's required. Case in point, I remember in the 60s, I was one of the first black males that got a management position for the New York Stock Exchange, not because I wasn't qualified, but because I asserted my civil rights by saying that I was going to close the New York Stock Exchange down because I was training white males, but because they were better connected, they were being promoted over me. And then 30 years later, my son, he breaks into the New York City Fire Department, which is 98% white male. And if it wasn't for those affirmative action programs, he wouldn't have been able to break through that door. As Alvin said, the discrimination is not as overt and we see it as it used to be in the early part of the
These connections.
but it's there.
Yeah.
It's there.
Isn't it interesting that when white men get hired, it's always merit. And when anyone else gets hired, it's something else.
Believe me, it's not always
Listen,
merit.
I'm very, very wary of this notion of more qualified or most qualified because that's such a subjective judgment. And as I alluded to earlier, obviously your experiences and comfort levels and a lot of other things figure into it. I think basically what we ought to be talking about is with most jobs, you find there is a pool of qualified applicants. People, any one of them can do that job. And given that pool of applicants, if you have a workforce where where minorities are not represented or are unfairly represented or women are unfairly represented, why not make an effort toward expanding that diversity in your workplace? You're getting a qualified employee. Why not make that effort?
I think if they're equal, I agree with you completely.
Equal is impossible to
But
judge.
I'll tell you, people can make honest judgment. I can recall one specific, I know we're just about the halfway point, a clear-cut case where there were 4 white males ranked the best, and my boss at AT&T directed me to promote the 5th-ranked person, a young woman who was only there a few years, solely to meet his quota. He had to have a quota of so many women. All the division managers disagreed. Now, she was never discriminated prior. If she had been discriminated against, if she were 57 and was discriminated against, was not the best qualified because of that discrimination, I'd even accept
Well, the
that.
Supreme Court has said the quotas are illegal, so I would hope the corporations aren't doing that.
I
There's a lot
don't
of
know
things
if
to
they're
talk
doing it.
about.
This
We
is back
still
in,
have incidents.
Let me hold you gentlemen
Okay.
there. We'll pick it up after the
All
break.
right.
We're going to pause for a moment for a public service announcement. We'll be right back. Thanks.
My hero hasn't traveled the world. Doesn't star on her own TV show. Can't sing very well. My hero didn't plan on being pregnant. Put her career on hold. Chose to have and love me. My hero, my mom.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
My hero isn't able to slam dunk. Doesn't make $1 million a year. Can't rap at all. My hero helped my mom when she was pregnant. Takes care of us. Chose to have and love me. My hero, my dad.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
Welcome back. We're talking with Alvin Bessent and Bill Andrews. Gentlemen, just before the break, we were having a heated discussion. Not that heated, but I want to nail this down a little bit. What exactly do you, each of you feel is the largest factor contributing to poor education in the black community? Or factors?
Bill
Poor,
jump in that one.
contributing to
Poor
poor
education
education.
in the black community.
Well,
Poor
I
everyone.
think it's our school system. I mean, we have a school system that gives the teachers union really a monopoly on our education. We don't have what made this country great, which is choice, free choice, where you can choose what's the best school for you. It's no secret the inner city schools have failed, both white and blacks, terribly. But if you have the economic means, you opt out. And it's funny, in New York City, it used to be 75% of the teachers' children were not even in the system. I don't know what it is now, but I think that if we don't go to some kind of voucher or free choice system, it's just going to crumble on its own, the educational system. So it's a disaster.
You know, I think very often in schools there's low expectations for minority kids, and that can be crushing. There's a body of educational research to support that notion. I didn't just pull that out of my head. I'm not that smart. But I look at my grandson, who has some health problems, and he was struggling in school for a long time, to the point where I actually had an administrator tell me that he'd be lucky if he graduated from high school and would never go to college. Mm-hmm. He is now a college student, a very successful one. But we pulled him out of that school, of course, and put him in a different situation where they had much higher expectations for him and didn't. And took nothing as an excuse.
I'm amazed you
He
have a grandson that old. I'm shocked. Yeah, you have
I
me.
do. But he thrived and he prospered and he ended up being a B+ student. And it's not always. I mean, you can't isolate a factor like that. But I think when you put a kid into a situation where all of the people in authority expect that he's only going to be so good, he will only be so good.
Yeah, mostly it's a babysitting system. Now, I give the Mayor Bloomberg in the city credit. He is trying some of the tools that we use in business. But why don't we have a free market system in education? We have it on a college level. We have it on every other level except in the elementary level, where it's most important to give those kids the good foundation that we know works in sports and everything else, where, hey, what's best for the child is the centerpiece as opposed to what's best for the teachers or the union. It's ridiculous.
Well, that leads me to my next question. And what you said, as President Bush addressed, the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Mm-hmm.
That is crushing. But it's interesting that the black community support school vouchers to the tune of 75%, higher than the white community, which is only 50%. Why is this magic bullet, in my view, a magic bullet? School vouchers, choice. I mean, everyone's big on choice. Why isn't that given to the school system? What's holding it back? Is it the teachers' unions, the monopoly?
Well, I'd say in a case like this, you could follow the money. If you follow the money, the black politicians, they don't support it. Why don't they support it? Because in New York City, any politician that vowed for choice, vouchers, whatever you said, he or she was a target of the teachers' union. And believe me, they have the money to see that that person doesn't get reelected.
Listen, I don't know that choice is a magic bullet. Can it help? Yeah, I think so. Although I'd love to see it in charter schools and within the public education system, because I think there's a value in the integration of homogeneous groupings of kids you get in public schools that you don't get when you begin to segregate in the private schools. And in a place like New York City, a voucher for a few $1,000s is not going to get my kid into a quality private school. It's just going to trap them. For a lot of black families, you're just going to end up trapping their kids in schools that have been abandoned by everyone else and that will wither and become even worse.
See, my point on that, and we could have a good discussion on this, I see, is that if we have free choice, the bad schools will be done away with. And that's what they try to do in the charter school, and that's just a baby step. It's a step in the right direction. But
Alvin mentioned integration. I've seen half a dozen studies, Alvin, and I mean, contradicting what you just said. The most integrated schools are the private schools.
I'm not just talking about racial integration. I'm talking about cultural, social integration, economic integration, all of those things.
The Catholic school, now not the ritzy private schools. I'm drawing a distinction. 90% of private schools are religious schools, Jewish, Protestant, Catholic. 10% are the ritzy private schools. The 90% I'm talking about, those schools are much more highly integrated than any of the public schools, which segregate by neighborhood, basically.
Well, I will point out the fact that the school I was talking about that had low expectations for my grandson was a religious school.
Well, that could have been in that case, but overall...
I'm just suggesting
yeah,
that
I'm
that's
sure it
no
was,
panacea.
But
I'm not
I just want to say the so-called, and we have a thing as I'm also on the board of United New Yorkers for School Choice, which is public education should really be the expenditure of taxpayers' dollars for education, not as what the public school system that we have today. If you're in New York City, you know that better than 85 to 90% of that school is going to be what we call minority, black and Hispanic. It's not going to be that integrated panacea that people say public education is supposed to be. You have white flight. It's taken place a long time ago.
Well, let me ask Alvin now. You mentioned charter schools before. Suppose a black parent concerned about the moral development of his or her children, concerned about that high legitimacy rate, wants to have his child taught religious values, taught the Bible, in addition to math, English, history, and science, which the state requires, but also to be taught a moral set of values at odds with what he or she might get in the public school. Why shouldn't that low-income black parent have that right?
They do have that right.
How do they have that?
They can send their kid to any school they want. What you're asking is why shouldn't taxpayer dollars pay for it?
Yeah, well, if they're poor, they
That's a
can't
different
afford
issue.
it. Why shouldn't a parent, why shouldn't the money follow the child? Why should you have to pick a government-run school in order to get a free education?
I think there are benefits to a public education. I honestly do. And that's a
Why?
long debate of going down a whole
What
different
would be,
track.
I mean, the integration, the studies show the private religious schools are much better integrated racially, economically as well. The tuition that we're talking about at the private schools is about less than half, way less than half the cost of a public school. It's maybe $5,000, $6,500 for high school, $5,000 for elementaries. Public schools are spending $15,000 in the city, and now $20,000 out here in Long Island. So I mean, for half the price, less than half the price, half when you adjust for everything, the transportation that's paid by the public schools, half the price. They're doing 99% of the Catholic schools, the minority students, black and Hispanic, 99% graduation rate in the Catholic schools.
And you know why they do better in those schools? Because anyone who isn't doing better, anyone who's perceived to be a problem is bumped out.
Another
They're
false.
treated the way, it's not
It's
a falsehood.
false.
It's not a
What
falsehood.
percentage
Maybe in
do
the
you
schools
think?
you know.
What percent do you think are thrown out?
I have no idea what percentage.
I do know.
I'm
It's
talking
less
about
than
personal
1%.
experience.
Well, that was yours. Must have been 1 in 1,000. It's less than 1% are asked to leave. 99 stay in. More than 99% stay in.
Are you talking nationally? You're talking Long Island? You're talking the city?
I'm talking
What?
the private schools in New York City. 99% graduation, and the cost of much taxpayers win with this. The kids get a moral training. They're doing better better educationally. Plus, the parents now get more involved. Just by virtue of the fact they made the
I'll tell you
choice, they get
something.
more involved.
There's a church of John Coltrane out in San Francisco. Should the government pay for people to go to a school that they run? What about Muslim
I don't know who
schools?
John Coltrane is.
A jazz musician. What about
Does
what
it
about Muslim
teach math,
schools?
English? Yeah. If it, do they teach?
Yeah, it would
as
just
long
be
as they don't
anything.
teach you how to
Right.
make bombs.
Right.
As long as they don't teach you how to make bombs.
We should have like we have on the college level.
Sure.
Why do we have to wait until the young person becomes a college level where they can go to any school, any trade school, whatever? And I'll tell you why. It's because of the monopoly that's controlled by, in
teacher
Albany and
unions.
New York, the teachers' unions. Simple as that.
Well, I'm not
You
gonna
have
defend the
many-
teachers' unions
You
in
have
New York.
many teachers in New York City, both white and black. I've spoken to them when I was doing these battles, and they'll tell you, yeah, we would love to give you what you want, Bill, but our union, our
let 'em.
leadership is not
My
going
mother-
to allow it.
my mother and
Why?
my wife are
Because the
public school
Board of
teachers in the
Ed,
city.
which they call the New York City Department of Education, is one of the biggest cash cows in this country. Everybody feeds at that trough. Unions.
So do you oppose school choice for poor? When I say school choice, I mean giving them a part of the educational dollar, not as much as the public school
Do I
kids.
personally oppose school choice?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
I mean,
I
by
articulate
school-
that
school
position
vouchers.
because everyone else was on the other side.
So you would not. You would support giving
Listen,
a scholarship
I am,
to a poor black
I am
kid.
very, very frustrated with schools that fail consistently and trapping kids in those schools that fail
And
consistently.
you should be able to take your grandchild out and put them in another school and have some money paid by the taxpayers, not as much as the public school kid gets, but say half as much, and pick whatever school you want.
I think you do have a problem philosophically in terms of the country when you start using tax money to pay for
Well,
religious
But why do we
education.
do it on every other level except the elementary
Hospitals. You can get a Social Security check from the government and give it to your church if you want. You can go to whatever hospital you want. Pell Grants you can use at a Christian college, a
level?
Jewish
Why
college.
why do I need some social worker pay them an administrator a lot of money to choose what's the best school for my child? Why do I need somebody to make that decision? I, as a parent, shouldn't I have that right?
Let me give you another tough question now. We have only 3 minutes. The polls show whites are between 40 and 50% pro school choice, pro voucher. Blacks are 70 to 80%. Hispanics the same, 70 to 80%. Considering those, and every poll shows that, Gallup poll after every poll I've seen on that. Considering that, why is it that black voters, and this is a big issue, education, as everyone recognizes, black voters, 90% plus, vote, typically Democratic, for candidates who oppose school choice. They're gung-ho for it, more than the whites, but they're voting for black politicians, state assemblymen, state senators, U.S. congressmen, who oppose it. Why? Why?
Because it's not the only issue.
Is it? It's not the. Is it the? What issues are more important than that?
Oh, we could go through.
Give me the one or two big issues more important.
Well, we talked about employment. We talked about discrimination. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about war
they're
and
related
peace.
to
Why don't we
education.
talk about war and peace? That's important.
Okay,
I mean,
so
there are
that-
a million and one
so you
things.
think it's-
Healthcare is important. There are a million issues. No one votes. Most people don't
you're
vote
right,
based on
you're
just
right.
a single issue.
But I'll say this: the other side that are anti-pro-choice when it comes to vouchers, they've done a better job in painting in the minority community why you should vote for me. Like Alvin said, oh, there are other issues more important. Instead of realizing that the best issue and the most important issue for your child is getting that child educated properly, and then some of the other issues will take care of itself for employment and upward mobility and so forth. But the other side, they spend the money, they have the money, and they control those politicians in there, and it never sees the light. What do we have in New York City? Yeah, we have school choice. Try to transfer from one of those failing schools to one of the better schools. All hell breaks loose. We don't have the space. So they come up with this version of charter schools, which is no panacea. It's better than what we have, because if that school fails, after 2 or 3 years, it can be shut down. That's the only difference, or the major difference.
Let's let Alvin. We have only
1
1
minute.
minute left. Let's Alvin say. What would you say if you had to recommend something to help black unemployment rates go down? What's the one biggest thing you'd recommend?
Oh my goodness.
In 45 seconds.
Well, first and foremost, I'd recommend that kids pay attention to their education, that it is important. I would try and get across the idea that if you look at the world, it's not, the possibility that you're going to be a rapper or a basketball star or a football star are very minimal. But oftentimes kids look at those people as multi-gazillionaires who have transcended, and that's what they want to be. And at the other end, all they see is poverty and lack of opportunity.
Excellent point.
What I would point out is that this broad middle of educated people who have very good lives, who make very good livings, who educate their kids, care for their families, and do it, and that education is a much more reliable route to get there.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our guests tonight, Alvin Bessett and Bill Andrews. Please join us again, same time, same channel next week. Take care.